So, hello everybody. I'm the Director of Communications for the Department of Psychiatry and the New York State Psychiatric Institute. I joined psychiatry in March after 2.5 years working at Columbia's Central Office of Communications and Public Affairs on our downtown campus. I now work at Columbia's medical campus, so I moved from 116th to 168th, maybe 2 miles, but it is a world away. So bear with me. I'm going to give you a little more of my CV since I promise it's relevant to the topic at hand. So prior to Columbia, I spent 15 years at Rutgers University as the editor of the university's faculty and staff newspaper, and then working with Greg Trevor, our lead conference organizer and my supervisor for 12 years. We launched together in 2009 a university-wide comprehensive news center called Rutgers Today. And Rutgers is a university of 26,000 faculty and staff and 65,000 students. And I also spent some time in central communications at NYU Langone Medical Center. So for most of my career, I've worked in central university communications, and Columbia Psychiatry is my first position that reports into a department and a department chair. Central communications at most institutions typically reports into vice presidents and ultimately to the president of the university, which is quite different from the other units. Schools report into deans and institutes mainly to directors. So they're very different types of jobs. And even my job at Columbia Psychiatry is a little different than most because I also work for an affiliated institute. Columbia and the New York State Psychiatric Institute are affiliated, and the institute is under the State Office of Mental Health, which reports into, so I work for state and for private. So since the early participants in the huddle, as you may have heard before, came mainly from Central Communications Division, we haven't offered much in the way of sessions on communications with smaller units. So I thought it would be interesting to also hear from communicators at schools, institutes, and departments essential to promoting information, messaging, and the vision of their units or divisions, and how they balance these priorities and navigate relationships with the goals of the Central Communications Office, which is responsible for enhancing and protecting the reputation of the institution at large. And we will also hear from others in Central Communications as well. So I'm sorry this took so long, but I'm really looking forward to hearing about the priorities and challenges of working in the smaller communications offices and how they go about their jobs. So I'm going to introduce our panelists now. First, we have a former colleague of mine in Central Communications, Kelly Moffitt. Kelly Moffitt is a passionate storyteller who works at the intersection of digital media and storytelling and serves as the engagement editor for the Office of Communications and Public Affairs. Prior to that, she worked in communications for the School of Professional Studies at Columbia. Previously, she worked as a producer for StoryCorps, traveling the country, recording stories and editing those recordings for broadcast on NPR's Morning Edition. And while at StoryCorps, she was the recipient of a fellowship that identifies 3 digital journalists under 30 whose work represents the best of new media. She teaches classes in digital media, personal branding, and podcast creation at institutions like NBC Universal Lift Labs, the Independent Filmmakers Project, and NYU. And a lot of the people on this panel are my former colleagues, or I guess still my colleagues. So we do have Notre Dame as well. So the next person I'm going to introduce is Vanita Gowda. and she is Chief Communications Officer at Columbia's Mailman School of Public Health. She leads an integrated communications and marketing effort for the graduate school with more than 1,400 students and more than 250 million in sponsored research. She joined Columbia after more than 20 years in the public and private sectors, where she focused on global development, health, social impact, and corporate citizenship issues. Now we have Notre Dame. Joanne Fahey is a 2003 graduate of the University of Notre Dame with a bachelor's degree in political science and peace studies. She also holds a Master of Science in Environmental Science from Trinity College in Dublin. And this I'm really jealous of. Before returning to her alma mater, Joanne spent 11 years in Ireland, serving as communications manager at the Fulbright Commission of Ireland and as a senior environmental communications consultant with the RPS group. And Marie, I guess the cliche, last but not least, another colleague of mine, Maria DeNoia Aronsohn is a development strategist, communications professional, and journalist who has covered politics, environment policy, health, science, government, and community life. She is also an Emmy Award-winning TV reporter and documentary producer with a vast body of work that has appeared on major television, internet, and radio outlets. Before joining Lamont-Doherty Earth Observatory as Director of Strategic Communications, Marie served as Director of Development and Communications of YWCA Northern New Jersey and co-created, co-produced, and hosted a television program called The Spark. So that's interesting too, because we haven't heard from many people who combine development and communications. So I'm ready to turn it over to our panelists. And first we're going to hear from Kelly.
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here today. I, like Carla mentioned, I came to Central Communications from a school. So I understand a little bit about both wanting to vie for larger audience attention and also needing to curate to fit in audience needs. The big thing for me when I think about like the interplay between these two kind of competing or collaborating needs is the idea of audience. And I guess that requires me to explain a little bit more about what I do. I am the engagement editor for the Central Office of Public Affairs, which is, our primary product is the Columbia News, which has a news site as well as a weekly newsletter, several different kinds of newsletters. And what I think about, most people ask me like, well, what does being an engagement editor mean? And for me, if to boil it down, like it's to be an advocate for the audience. So I'm looking at metrics and thinking about like what the audience for Central Communications is and what best we can present that audience to serve them and give them opportunities, as well as that competing interest of grabbing the attention of other media outlets and potential people who may just be interested in Columbia more generally, as well as serving alumni and sometimes current students, as well as faculty and staff. So a lot of my work is around researching what best fits those different audience profiles, and then how to create content for them or curate from around the university to fit those different audience pieces. So that's really kind of how I approach the relationship between Central and other parts of campus. I'm really, and all of that is really predicated upon following the right digital accounts, making the right connections across the university, and really being able to say like, yes, I think this will really work for who reads our newsletter, who reads our website, and be willing also to say, no, I don't think this is really something that fits there, and finding ways to politely communicate that.
Are you done, Kelly?
Yeah.
Okay. First, before I introduce, before we go to Vanita, I just want to share this screen to give you a lay of the land of Columbia. Let's see. Share. Share. Can you see the screen? Can everybody see it?
Yep.
Okay, good. So I'm just showing you a little bit in terms of how the panelists here relate to each other. So Kelly is up at the top, central. And interestingly, Columbia University Irving Medical Center has a small central communications team. And who converses with, I call it the Morningside campus. It's basically the large campus on 116th Street. And then we have me in a department. We've got Vanita at a school and Marie at an institute. So that's just a little bit of the lay of the land. All right.
And I think it's interesting that it's in that kind of pyramid fashion, because I think we can also think of it from like an audience's perspective, right? Like maybe it's more of a funnel, like there's the broadest possible audience, which is central, Columbia trying to catch as many different kinds of people as we can, and it funnels into different audiences that gets smaller. So sometimes like in my brain, I'm not even thinking as a pyramid.
Yeah, I mean, to some people, the medical center would be at the top. It's kind of like that New Yorker cartoon, if anyone's seen it, a New Yorker's idea of the world. And you just have this huge skyline, Okay, so Vanita, we'll go to you.
You might want to stop sharing screen.
Oh, okay. Hold on. I didn't realize. I thought if I moved it down, it would go away. Embarrassing myself. Uh-oh.
If you put your cursor right at the top, Carla, something should pop up that says.
Oh, here. Stop sharing. This is really embarrassing. Okay.
This happens all the time in classes I teach, don't worry.
Oh, excuse me.
No, I'm saying I do this all the time.
Okay.
So hi everyone, my name is Vanita Gowda, and I'm as Carla mentioned, the Chief Communications Officer at Columbia's Mailman School of Public Health. As Carla just kind of showed on the slide, the Mailman School of Public Health is part of Columbia's Irving Medical Center, which in turn is part of the larger, Columbia University sort of ecosphere. I report to the Dean of the Mailman School of Public Health. And it might be different for other Columbia panelists, but there's not a formal matrixed situation that I work in. So I don't have a formal dotted line to anybody, but there are a lot of informal dotted lines all over the entire university. So, one informal dotted line is to the team at the medical center. Another is to the team down at Central. They're internal to the School of Public Health. I work really closely with department chairs and center directors, sometimes individual faculty, a lot of the administrative units, little, informal dotted lines all over the place there. But, I think the complexity of that academic environment is one that sort of sets it apart. It's not, and it really depends, all those informal dotted lines depends on everyone being very collaborative and understanding that you need them to get your job done and they need you, but there's nothing in writing saying 2% of your time goes to that person and 5% goes to this person. And so the juggling, the priorities and all of that can be, one thing that I think is unique about being at a school versus, the central, because you have a lot of different people coming at you, although central does too as well. So that's a little bit of our kind of set up. My team, I lead a team of 8 of us in total. We're set up in I would say a fairly traditional kind of communication style. We have media relations officers, we have digital officers, a designer, writers and things like that. What we don't have, and I'll come back to this, is a sort of formal marketing unit. And, to me, this is also something that is a little bit different about the academic environment that you'll see the word communications used a lot. And when you talk to one person, they'll say, well, my job is supporting development, or my job is I run our digital ads, or my job is I do, I'm a writer, but we'll all be called communications people. We don't get to that. It's not like when you're at a company and there's a marcom person and a product marketing person. We don't get to those levels of titles. So we all sort of do everything. But like I said, are set up in a fairly traditional way. I would say that my priorities as the head of communications for the School of Public Health are sort of twofold. One is really sort of enhancing and maintaining the reputation of the school, which ideally is something that then lifts, is the rising tide that lifts the boats of the, my colleagues. So it helps our development officers, go out there and raise money. It helps our, recruiters go out there and get students. It's what leads to faculty getting invited places to speak and so on. So that sort of broad reputation. But the other sort of important mission we have in the communications department is to really serve a public service through promoting our research. And that really kind of came to the fore in this past year and a half, especially. We were the sort of source of expertise for news outlets all over the world, and also even to our colleagues at the medical center and at Columbia. And so to me, there's a reputational benefit of being quoted in the New York Times and the Washington Post and so on, but there's, not to be too jaded about it, but it's also a public service to do that. So I would say those are sort of our two big goals in the department. And then from there, we also work really directly with on enrollment marketing. So we lead like digital ads and things like that. I work in particular on my team a lot around supporting our dean with thought leadership, speaking engagements and writing and things like that. We certainly support our development office and help them. And one nice thing, especially in the past years, we've had our development officers come and tell us that a donor came to us because they heard one of our faculty on NPR and actually came to us that way. So that's a very direct way to support, but we also help them in a number of other ways. And as I mentioned before, working directly with chairs and research heads and things like that on their own profile kind of building and things like that. And I think one area that also has come to the fore is a lot of work on issue management and kind of, or what you might want to say is kind of crisis communications, on a number of things, ranging from things that are internal to Columbia to things that are, shutting down the entire school in 2 days and, getting that information out to everybody. So there's a lot of different aspects there, but all of that comes also to our department. And, the one thing that I find interesting is I'm fairly new to the academic environment after being at nonprofits and public sector. One thing that I found really interesting is the issues around the brand, right? That, particularly at a school like Columbia, it's an old school, it's got an old brand, a strong brand, and not a lot is put into maintaining that brand in a traditional sense, for example. So Columbia Central doesn't invest in, there aren't ads on the subways, there aren't billboards, there aren't digital ads and things like that. And there's a role, because the brand is so strong. And so sometimes the challenge can be when you're at a school, and certainly we benefit from having the Columbia name in our school, but at a graduate school level, we have a number of kind of competitors in the field. And so we actually do have to invest in some of that kind of brand building that sometimes the central office does and doesn't, or doesn't do. And that can be, a little bit of a challenge just because those resources, if Columbia did the subway ads, it would be easier for us to tag on to those, but they don't. And so that, to me, I find is like an interesting, how we all handle kind of competitive pressures, I think are different at school level, medical center level, at a research center and things like that. It can be different than what goes on at the central office, who certainly have their own competitive pressures, but it's different than for others. I would say that's kind of one thing that's interesting because, if we were at a big company, Central would handle the brand for everybody. But it is sort of more decentralized academic, environment. That's not necessarily the case. The other thing that I've sort of seen in the past year and a half too, is I mostly would work with Central and the medical center around the issues management stuff, because that is where that, you know, our brand does affect their brand and vice versa. But in the past year, particularly with the pandemic, they've really relied on our school's research for fueling the newsletters and what's on social media and what's on the website. And so we actually end up working together a lot more on the almost day-to-day getting the news out to the world than we normally do. And so that's been, you know, a really nice experience. But you know, an environment like Columbia, we're fairly decentralized. So the sort of day-to-day, if I'm going to post something on if we're going to post something on our website, that's sort of our decision. We're not running that through the medical center or central. Sometimes they'll look at it like a wire service. Sometimes they'll pick us up. They'll say, that's a great story. Let's put that on our homepage. In the past year and a half, that happened quite a lot. So to the point where they would start saying, what else do you have coming up the pike, which was not something that necessarily happened in the past. So I kind of think of us, if you are a former journalist like me, it's sort of like this, like we're the AP. The whole system is the AP, and we're all stringers, and the central kind of picks and, you know, is sort of looking at all the stringers and deciding what they're going to do there. And that's sort of an apt analogy, but they're not making assignments. They don't say, oh, this faculty is doing that, we need an article from you. In the past year, they've said, oh, it wouldn't hurt if we had an article on such and such, because we're getting a lot of questions about this aspect of the pandemic. But again, that was sort of a special case. And as I mentioned, the complexity of the environment is another sort of interesting bit. And the last bit I would come to that I think is also different in academic environment, school to central, but maybe not dissimilar to other types of institutions, is creating the value for community. It's sort of getting across the value of communications, because in this environment where, you know, the mission is primarily education and research, and how do you sort of create the space to show people, well, this is what communications does to enable the research and the education. I feel like sometimes in a really complex environment like Columbia, that can get a little bit lost, but I don't know that that's dissimilar to other institutions. Anyway, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now we're on to Joanne from Notre Dame.
Hi, I'm Joanne Fahey, and I've got a couple slides I'm going to share, so just give me a second. Let's see. Can everyone see my slides?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So I'm Joanne Fahey. I'm the Director of Research Communications within Notre Dame Research. I decided to put together a couple of slides because I'm really visual, and also we have a lot of acronyms. And so if I'm having an academic experience like you, it probably has lots of acronyms. So I thought this might help orient people to Notre Dame Research. So we are a central unit that reports up through the Office of the Provost. And within NDR, as we call ourselves, there's 24 centers, institutes, core facilities that report up through our Vice President for Research. So you can see a couple there in our screenshot, everything from environmental change to cancer, precision health to real estate. The key way that they typically report to us, as opposed to a college or school, is when they have cross-disciplinary faculty. So if you have architecture faculty and engineering faculty in your center, it is most likely that you're going to fall under the Vice President for Research as opposed to a dean. And that's just an easy way to remember it. So I lead a team called Notre Dame Research Communications, and I'm going to give you a little bit of history here because it's important to kind of the tactics that I want to discuss in terms of how we build and manage relationships with our different departments. So I was hired in 2014 as the first ever Director of Research Communications, and that was really in response to research as a growing priority at the university. Like Columbia, Notre Dame has a really strong brand, but it's probably one that you might know for things like Rudy and football and our great undergraduate experience. But it actually has a really fantastic research enterprise, and just one that doesn't always get the traction that those other great pieces of the brand receive. So anyways, my role was meant to be all encompassing. I was a sort of Jill of all trades, doing strategy, writing, storytelling, all the things that everyone probably on this conference experiences. That was really hard because it was a lot to tell and a lot to do. I was fortunate to be able to hire one staff member early on. She then focused on the writing and storytelling component, but we still did not have a ton of capacity to support our different units because we were really focused on the Notre research as part of the Notre Dame brand. And that didn't leave a lot of time for helping our Harper Cancer Research Institute, for example, tell their story. So fast forward a couple years, NDR went through a reorganization. This was led through our HR department, and it was looking at all of our 25-ish centers and institutes and the 300 staff that report up through my boss. And one theme that was kind of coming up pretty frequently was communications and the need to have some sort of central team that could really support all the different units. And I was really happy to hear that, because in my role, I could see that, there were different groups that had a full-time communicator, they had admin support, they were putting out great content all the time. And then another unit had no one, and they were really, frankly, getting left behind. And so this was a real way for us to address some equity issues. So there, I won't get into the detail of how we did all this, but there was a lot of change management. We had 4 staff that were previously in those units move over and report to me. And then they had to go through transitions as well, because they were Jacks and Jills of all trades doing everything, and they had to specialize. And so that was the key way that we started to transform how we served our different units. So rather than them doing everything, I now have, if you were on the last session, you heard from Alex, who's my web and social media manager. You may have heard from Michael earlier on, who does all of our design and outreach. We have writing and storytelling, and we're actually hiring for video and photography. So if you know anyone great, tell them to go to jobs.nd.edu. But really, the rationale for this was a more streamlined service that was equitable across our groups. And so we were able to better support our central ND brand because we templated a lot of things. We were able to have cost savings. We streamlined subscriptions. For example, we now cover, say, our Emma subscription, whereas different units were paying that individually. And so we really were able to make cost savings there. And then ultimately we had a bigger impact, and I'll show that a little bit at the end. But the big question is, how do we do this? And this is what I wanted to share today. When I saw Carla's topic, I thought, I've got a great story to tell here, because I don't think that service level agreements are something that a lot of units use, and especially a unit that is not a, we're not cost recovery, we're available for use. But so anyways, we created these service level agreements, and you can see some screenshots there on the slide, but basically they were a Word document that I made that identified every potential communications tactic and outlet that we could possibly think of. And then we talked through with our groups who is going to do what. And they were really illuminating and intense. And I have a lot to say about them, but I'll keep it short and sweet to say that it really helped us to formalize our relationship at the beginning, because a lot of people had some uncertainty. They didn't know what a central group was going to be able to achieve. They also maybe were feeling anxious because they were losing a staff member who could do it all for them before. So this really allowed us to sit down and say, hey, this is what we're going to do. This is what we need your help in doing. And then here's how we work with our campus partners, because that's another piece of the SLA. We were able to really say clearly, we work exclusively with ND service providers. We only use our central Marcom team for websites, things like that. So we were able to lay out a lot of ground rules early on that I think set us up for success in the long term. So Carla asked us to talk about challenges. I tried to frame mine as learnings, because I was, still lots to learn and lots to improve on. But I think the SLAs were really good for our initial clarification of roles. But for anyone on this this conference who went through this with me, I think they could say too that they were time consuming and they were harder to manage over the long term. And so it's something that I want to improve on even this year, as I think about how do we revisit these to make sure that we're still serving our faculty and our units well, but in a way that keeps it fluid and moving. So it's something I'm working on. I think the other thing that I probably didn't spend enough time thinking about at the time was, this was all about who is doing what and when, but we didn't talk at the SLA level about what are we going to stop doing. And that is actually a huge piece of what we do. And to the point that we just shut down 4 YouTube channels in the last 3 months, because we're just trying to consolidate. We really spend a lot of time with our units saying, why are we doing this? Are we getting the right audiences? We've closed down, I can't even tell you how many Facebook pages, and opened up a lot of LinkedIn pages trying to get in front of the right audiences. So that's something I would have thought of earlier, or I wish I had thought of earlier on. And then finally, like everyone, COVID threw everything out the window. There isn't a lot of time for us to sit down and say, hey, let's talk through, this 8-page document and who's doing what. Like, it's actually now, no, I'm on a G chat with a faculty member trying to get this thing done today. So it's a whole new world. And so we're adapting to that as well. But I think in practice, they're a really valuable tool. And even if you don't get into them in the level that we did, it's a great way to define a relationship early on. And then overall in practice, we just have a few principles that we like to keep in mind as we're working through this. So our vice president always wants us to be refs, and that's responsive, effective, and friendly. And I think to the responsive piece, we always, if we're not able to do it, because again, there's so much wonderful research coming out of the University of Notre Dame, we have to rely on our partnerships. And I know Columbia has mentioned this as well, but working with our Central Office of Public Affairs and Communications, working with my colleagues in the colleges and schools, we're in constant communication to say, hey, do you have capacity to cover this story? I can't get to it until X, Y, and Z. And so really trying to find solutions for our faculty to make sure we're serving them at the highest level. But overall, it works. I think we produced a lot. Just last year, we had 56 stories written on research. We launched 12 new LinkedIn pages, and we sent 92 newsletters. Hopefully you've received some of those. If not, we'd love to have you join our mailing list to learn more about ND research. And so that's it. I'm looking forward to being part of the panel. Thanks.
Thanks, Joanne. I have a question. This obviously got buy-in, from everybody at the university. How did you do that? Or was this sort of an edict from the top down?
I think a lot of the SLA process was part of this, this change management, like people who maybe hadn't worked closely with me before, getting to know me and trust that my team could deliver for them. But it also did have the highest level buy-in. This, it was a reorg managed through HR, and then our vice president for research was the one who made the decision to make the change. I will say that everyone who moved over to my team also had the choice. I offered them a position to join my team. So we didn't rush it either. We spent time having conversations and figuring out the best way forward. And we're still also evolving. That video role is new. It's a revamp of someone on my team who retired, and she focused more on events. And that was really great to have, but our world has changed since then. And we just need to be able to respond quickly to digital needs and less so to events. So we're learning and growing still.
So you're telling research stories through video?
We're going to. We do a little bit on Spark right now. Michael on my team can do some animation, but right now we really rely on our excellent Office of Public Affairs and Communications team. But sometimes we just need things that are quick, and not that they're not quick, but they serve the whole university. And sometimes we just need things at a slightly lower level to what they produce, because they're phenomenal.
All right, well, thank you. We'll have some time to follow up with questions. Next, another former colleague of mine, Marie Aronsohn. And I'll just say, I talked about moving 2 miles uptown. Marie works on the bucolic campus, about maybe 35 miles from the city, at Lamont-Doherty Research Observatory, which is an institute, and she will tell you more about it. I was director of science communications, sort of the liaison across the university. So I had the chance to get an amazing tour up there. But with technology, I guess you're actually a little closer. So take it away, Marie.
All right. Thanks so much, Carla. And thanks a lot for inviting me to this talk. It's been really great listening to my colleagues talk about their processes. It's informative. I appreciate it. So again, yes, I'm Marie DeNoia Aronsohn. I work at the Lamont-Doherty Earth Observatory, which is Columbia University's Earth and Climate Science Research Campus. So we have about 300 PhD level research faculty, and they are superstars, leaders in their fields. Lamont is really famous for people who care about Earth and climate science. It's in its 72nd year, but among the legacy of achievements, Marie Tharp created the first global map of the seafloor. Lamont scientists were the first to show the role of global ocean in regulating climate first to forecast El Nino, first to develop seismological tools that enable treaties banning underground nuclear testing, and the first to design multiple generations of seismometers for deployment on Earth and on the moon by Apollo astronauts. So as Lamont's Director of Strategic Communications, you can see that I have a great story to tell. And it's a story that happens to be very, very relevant to the world right now. I'm talking about our legacy discoveries, but our climate discoveries are always in the news and always evolving. So in my role, I have two major objectives. One is I work under development, so fundraising. I lead development communication strategy at Lamont, but also across the much larger Columbia University Earth Institute, which encompasses many different departments and divisions and centers. The Earth Institute is now transitioning to become the Columbia Climate School, which is a very, very big part of the Columbia University story. First new school in 25 years. It's an transdisciplinary school, degree granting. It's really something. And it's a big part of where my job is evolving. The other role I have, other than supporting development, is capturing earned media for Lamont. I love the way Vanita put how important getting the word about our research out there is, that it is a public service, that it does lift all of the other efforts, development, recruitment, and grant making, and everything that happens. So I'm really privileged to have this role, but it is challenging, even though we have this amazing story to tell. You know, I'm in the #1 market in the world, New York, and obviously there's a lot of competition to be heard. But of course, we get coverage across the globe. So the challenge when I started about 5 years ago was to kind of bridge that gap between this enormous and growing story and this enormous media market and elevate it. While Lamont was getting tons of coverage in very science-focused journals and publications, not in the mainstream media that much. So I wanted to aim for television. As Carla had mentioned earlier, my background is media, broadcast journalist, documentary filmmaker. As I'm sure many former journalists here will tell you, and once a journalist, always a journalist. So the fact that I have this news judgment over many, many years has really helped me in this role. And I also have a large and growing list now of media contacts. So my major first task I felt was to become a trusted resource to them. I know how vital that can be when you are on deadline and you need to know, and that's me. And it's really, really worked well for us. Just anecdotally, I can tell you Nova was on campus a little bit earlier this month, doing a really big piece about our climate capture work, which is really exciting. And just, you know, for example, Nova came a couple of times over the years that I've been at Lamont, and I just moved mountains for them. I made sure everything was perfect. I did that this time too. And they keep coming back. And so again, here we go. We got this amazing research, amazing story to tell, making it easy for them and making it attractive to do it with us. So some of the challenges of being at Lamont is, it's interesting, historically, the Lamont-Doherty Earth Observatory really wanted to be the Lone Rangers doing their thing, as Carla said, you know, miles north, I think it's more like 15 miles north of Manhattan. And they wanted sort of just, it's our thing, we'll do our thing. And so the connection building has started in earnest over the years since I've been there and before. But there is this there are people at Columbia who I talk to, alums who have never heard of Lamont-Doherty Earth Observatory. And it's painful when I hear that, but I work on it. We've gotten quite a bit of, you know, again, in television coverage and so on and so forth. So there's that. And then there's the brand confusion that I sometimes run into when I do get this wonderful coverage. Will they say Lamont-Doherty Earth Observatory? You know, it's a mouthful. People don't always want to say that. They much rather say Columbia's Radley Horton, one of our scientists. So that's less of my challenge with central communications, but it's a challenge. It's kind of an odd place to be in this brand that is, as we have discussed, so strong and so revered, I think, admired. It's Columbia University. So it's kind of an odd place to be at times. I can tell you that when Carla was serving as the liaison, as she mentioned a bit earlier, it was very, very helpful because there was a real direct line to get stories amplified. I'm always looking to amplify some of these bigger stories. Now it's a little bit extra challenging. Basically, I think it's more because we're having some growing pains, if anything. That's what I call them, because the Columbia Climate School is in development. So there's so much going on all levels. So communications and all kinds of administrative levels that really getting attention for some of these stories at this point is a bit challenging. But I do see that evolving. I'm really excited because I know that now that the Columbia Climate School is going to open to the first cohort of students this fall, that the work that the scientists are doing at Lamont is going to get a lot of attention on all levels. So adding to this conversation, just I think I'm more of an outlier because my situation is rather different, I think, than most communications people. I'm kind of the Lone Ranger. I was hired to be entrepreneurial. This is it, just make it happen. And I've really, really enjoyed that. I did develop the social media strategy, and I did recruit this amazing digital media manager, and it's wonderful. And she works with me, but as well as the other communications people at Earth Institute. So, so there we go. I hope that I didn't confuse you with all the different institutes, but I think if anything, that demonstrates to you my challenge with brand confusion from time to time.
Wow, this is all really interesting. And there are many things, even about Columbia, that I didn't know. And I was the director of science communications. But, you know, I do have one thing that hasn't come up. You know, the word siloed hasn't come up, but that's probably the most common word I hear from small and large institutions, that there tends to be everybody's in their own silo, and how do we collaborate better? And the position I had within Central Communications was created to really reach out across the university, from the Earth Institute, Lamont, to the medical center, to engineering, to data science institute. I mean, it was kind of a disparate list of institutes, schools, centers, public health. And it wasn't, I stepped into it. It was created, I think, the position before me, and somebody, actually the person who I took the position from is now coming back and going to be in that position again, or just started. So, you know, I pulled these meetings together, and I often found that the Earth Institute really didn't have much in common with the medical center, but engineering really liked it because they had, you know, they were crossing over to many of the other entities. And, you know, I was hoping that some intercollaborative work would occur among these different entities. And I think that can be a really amazing thing, you know, through relationships, because even today, I don't know if you know about this, Vanita, but you just did a study on academic performance. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. It just came out.
Related to the effective air pollution on children's
air pollution, yes, on yes, children's academic performance. And we were about to send our newsletter, Psychiatry News, out this morning, and your colleague, Tim Paul, the editorial director over at the school, Health got in touch with me because I don't know if you've seen this, but this article just came out from the School of Public Health. Your faculty member happens to be the first author, psychiatrist. And I was like, no, I haven't heard about this. And you know what? This is a really good article. I'm pulling what we were opening with. And I did this the morning it was being sent out. I said, I'm going to open with this article, which I did. But, you know, how do you find out about these things? It's only because we built a prior relationship. And I guess my question really is about cross collaboration, not just with Central, but with other units across. And I guess, Marie, you were addressing that in some ways.
I mean, I can, maybe I'll start, and there's actually a question in the chat that sort of relates to this. So maybe I can address that too. But I think you're right. There is can be a sort of a tendency to silo just because, you know, I know our team often feels sort of stretched, other people's teams feel stretched. So it feels hard enough to deal with what's happening at your school or center or department, much less, you know, to then lift your head up and reach out across the university. You know, for us, kind of thinking about what Joanne said from this past year, that one of the positives that came out of the pandemic for us is because we were the public health school with a great, obviously, story to tell and a lot of really valuable information this past year. You know, we found some of that collaboration sort of happen naturally, and you know, we've now are trying to kind of institute it. Okay, great, we met this person at this school. They ended up being a great collaborator. How do we maybe have a regular monthly check-in with them and things like that? But that was sort of forced, you know, and it turned out really well. I do think one thing Carla used to do when she worked at Central Communications were these regular meetings where she brought together science communicators. And one thing that I felt sometimes when we have these meetings across schools or across the university, sometimes that there isn't an actual project for you to collaborate on, but sometimes the act of connecting with other communications people across the university is very helpful, just to have that professional network sometimes. Sometimes, you know, when you're the communications team within a school, you're the only people who are doing that kind of work. And so you know, kind of building that network. So I would say that I would certainly encourage people who work at schools and departments, even if you feel like, oh, there's nothing for us to work on together, sometimes just building that relationship can have other benefits, to learn how they're doing or just have people to vent to or whatever. But there's an amazing sort of network in your own backyard that I think, you know, especially the past, you know, year and a half or 2 years has kind of taught us. One question that came up in the chat is how we actually functionally go about sharing stories between the schools and the departments and Central. What we do at Columbia is that actually all the social media people across the university have sort of a Slack channel. Kelly would probably know a lot more about this. So I know that, for example, the person who leads social media for the School of Public Health is on that Slack channel. So when we have something that we posted to our social, or we have a study that we think really lends itself to, you know, other people picking up on social, she'll put it up there. And then her counterparts across the university will say, oh, I need this kind of content or that kind of, and just by virtue of having that Slack channel, which existed well before the pandemic and is even stronger now that we were doing remote work. She also had that sort of professional network of social media people. I know that the central office sort of has somebody who's kind of eyeballing all the schools' social media channels and kind of retweeting, reposting in addition to that Slack channel. So that's sort of one functional way, at least on social media. For our articles and things, one thing that my school's done that I think has been very helpful and successful is when we do have a new research item out or a great article about something cool our students did, we actually send it out to contacts at Central and at the medical center and say, you know, basically kind of hot off the press, this is what we're posting. Because they don't sit around and look at our website all day. So they're not going to see that we just posted it, and they're not even reading our social channels. But we found that that's been incredibly helpful, just to email people and say, look, we posted this, kind of what Tim did with Carla. Look, we posted this today. Did you know about it? And a lot of people will say, oh, I didn't. And actually, I'm looking for that kind of content. That's a very kind of old school way of doing it, but that has worked for us. And I think it's Jeffrey's. So another question. Columbia Central used to have a system where if they reran one of our stories, kind of took a story from us and thought it would suit them, they would actually put it on their own website. And then they reformed that practice. And now they actually have a link that will take the reader directly to our website. So we prefer that, because then we get that traffic and we get that person. And then we get, to Kelly's point earlier, that audience member of Columbia University who is clicking on the public health story because that interests them, will then go to our site, and maybe they didn't realize we had so much content, or maybe they didn't, realize, that we could be sort of a source of news for them, particularly for the reporters and things like that. So we much prefer having the traffic sent to us. And then there's a lot of stuff that lives on the Columbia site that they write themselves that lives there, which makes sense. But they might profile one of our faculty members that lives on their site. And then sometimes we'll link to them. We'll put it up on our site and link back the other way. But we certainly like that preferable than sort of them taking.
I have a question for Kelly, but the one thing I wanted to say to you is that Stephanie Berger, I'm going to give her a call out, because I always used to tell her she's the media relations person, and when something is published by the School of Public Health, she would send out the most organized pitch. It would just be, the language I could use. Here's our Twitter post. Here's our LinkedIn post. It was so helpful and so neatly done. So I really appreciated that. Now, the question I have for Kelly, it may be, you have to answer this diplomatically, but, having worked there, I know that our director of social media has a spreadsheet where people will post their tweets and so on, and she'll edit them. But Central also started a pitch form, and everything really should be pitched. My question is, how do you, make decisions, and how do you tell people sorry? Because you only have a certain amount of real estate. The newsletter can only take so much. The website can only take so much. Columbia News. So.
Well, first, to Vanita's point, I would say if you're asking the question if you should repost stories in two places,
No.
Absolutely bad practice from an SEO perspective. You want one place to hold the story, and then what's going to benefit you in Google searches, which is or any kind of search engine, is linking to that place. So even if you think like your Central has more cachet, it should be posted in both places. You don't want the competing headlines competing with each other. You want to link. So that, I think that is what precipitated the move to kind of like make this vanity link on Columbia News and then link back to its original site. In terms of, I think we all have like a sense of overwhelm. But I think being able to be like agile and able to make those last minute shifts when you hear about something, while at first, I felt like, oh my God, I love to plan. I'm not able to plan as well as I usually do. It's actually a good thing because it can be responsive to what's happening in the moment. And that is ultimately going to serve your audience pretty well. In terms of trying to determine what we can and cannot, this is what's great, is we have a bunch of different channels. So where something may not fit in our newsletter because it isn't quite like broad enough of an audience, maybe we have our thematic newsletter that comes out in a month about cancer research or about climate research that's coming out, that thematically it'll make sense there. Or maybe the fact that it doesn't fit, it can jog an idea for a new slate of content. Likewise, I think our director of social media, Acacia, they have a very kind of liberal view of like, let's try it. Let's make a social media post out of it, especially on Twitter. Like you can see if it flies or falls flat. You aren't losing too much by tweeting about good research that's happening. In terms of our site, I think we just constantly have to be asking, what do we know people really want to read from us? And what we've found is that we have to be able to make like a news you can use kind of pitch. out of the stories. So we need to be able to make a promise, like if someone's asking a question, our story is going to promise the answer. And sometimes we may see like research or other communications from other parts of the university that wouldn't make sense for it to live on its own, but we can combine it with a couple other things and serve as the curator. So to get back to that feeling of overwhelm, the audience is feeling it too. They have way too, especially with Columbia, they have way too many places to keep up with. So how can we consolidate and shorten and put them all in one place? So what we're finding is really, really popular with our audience is stories that are like, here's every way that you can celebrate or learn about pride at Columbia. So we take all the institutes, all the schools, and try to make a little listicle or something like that, that puts everything in one place. But that only really, knowing that only really came from, you know, gathering the analytics data and seeing the trends in that. And you really, in the digital age, need to have that kind of look at metrics to be able to make that call.
So we only have a couple of minutes left, and I don't see any other questions in the chat. If anybody has one, please put it in. I just, you know, for our last couple of minutes, does anybody who presented have anything burning they'd like to share that they haven't? Nobody wants the last word, I guess. So I guess that will be me. I want to thank all of you.
There is a question.
Oh, there is a question. Okay. What do those at Central wish those at institutes knew? I like that.
Joanne and Kelly, I guess.
Go ahead, Joanne.
Okay, well, I was just
real
gonna
short after you.
I guess from my perspective is that we are always trying to get the word out for you. And whether that comes down to kind of what Kelly was just saying, finding the right channel. Like I hope that people trust in their comms teams that we're working hard for you to get it in the right place at the right time. And just yesterday I was on a meeting where we were talking about a press release and we kind of decided it wasn't a press release, but it might make a really great internal newsletter for their community. And so I think just that trusting and that we want to get the word out.
I think a couple things pop to mind. Number one is like, we've talked about, this is like a very relational based kind of industry, but also like we do have the issue of turnover and a lot of communicators. So make sure you do have some sort of central alias in order to communicate with your communications group, because you may not remember to tell me, the person that's doing website at Central, that you're leaving or that you're moving into a different role. But I think that is really helpful. And also the idea of, I also think it's on the part of Central to write out specifically, here's what we're looking for. Here are the dimensions we need from your preview image to be able to tweet about your story. So having that back and forth of like, what do I need from you and what do you need from me? We just rarely take such a step back to have that moment. So I think starting out any relationship with those kind of like, here's what I need, here's what you need, would be really helpful.
So I think we have to close now. This has been fabulous. I think we could have talked for another hour. I want to thank the panelists. They were terrific. And I hope that I will see people at the half-hour happy hour, or as before somebody called it a half happy hour. I don't know.
There's been a big debate in my office.
Big debate,
as to which one to call it, the happy
Happy
half hour
half
or the half happy hour. I'm going to go with happy half hour because I'm very happy with the way this has gone all day. I think the sessions have all been excellent. You guys did a phenomenal job. Thank you very much.